On this week's MetPy Monday, find out how to use the unit information contained in united arrays to automatically add axes to your plots when some plotting functions might not do it for you. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer at Unidata. On this week's MetPy Monday, I'm actually going to answer a support request that we received, which was when I make a hodograph, if I use certain plotting functions, the units aren't automatically added to my plot for me. And this is true because of some intricacies in the matplotlib ecosystem right now, and eventually you won't have to do this, but this is a good thing to know how to do, is to pull that unit information out of an array that has units attached to it, what we call a united array, and then use it to do things like add axes labels, or use it in a plot title, or use it in a legend. So you don't have to hard code those values. You don't want to have to remember to go back and change knots to meters per second, for example. You just want that to come right out of the data, and your plot automatically updates. So to replicate this, what we're going to do is create a hodograph, and to do that, we need to go ahead and request some upper air data to play with. So I'm going to do all my imports in one big block up here at the top. So from datetime, I'm going to import datetime, so we can create a datetime object to get our data from. I'm going to import matplotlib. Then from metpy.units, we're going to need pandas data frame to unit arrays. And tab completion can help you out there. From metpy.plots, we're going to need to import the hodograph object. And then finally, from siphon.simpleWebService, Wyoming, we need to import the Wyoming upper air class. Now, things like the pandas data frame to unit arrays helper, the fundamentals of using the hodograph object, and getting data with Siphon using the simple web services have all been covered in other MetPy Mondays. So I'm not going to go too deep into those. We're just going to go ahead and use them. But if you need a quick review, pop back to those episodes. So now we've got our imports done, we need to get our data. This is going to return as a pandas data frame, so I'm going to use the sort of standard abbreviation DF. From Wyoming upper air, we're going to call the request data method. And if we use our shift tab help, if you don't remember how it works, you see it needs a time and a site ID. So for time, we're going to make a datetime object. I'm going to use January 1st, 12Z of this year. And I'm going to get a sounding from Topeka. So we have our data now. Notice there is a warning from pandas. Again, that's nothing that you're going to need to worry about. This is just pandas not necessarily enjoying how we're injecting some of this unit information right now. If you can't tell, units is a common sticking point in the Python ecosystem. It's been getting a lot better, but we're still not there yet. Now I'm going to take that pandas data frame and actually get my united arrays, the things that we're fundamentally going to want to be using. So I'm going to call that sounding to avoid reusing a variable and things being confusing of having df not be a data frame. And we're going to use that helper, pandas data frame to unit arrays, and it just takes our data frame. So this has created, if you remember, a dictionary where the key is the name of the variable and the value is an array with units attached. So for example, if we look at what keys are in that dictionary, you see these are all the variables we have. If we look at an individual variable, say pressure, you see that it is a united array and it has the units of hectopascals. So now that we have some data, we're finally ready to go ahead and make a hodograph. So first, let's make a simple hodograph, right? Always break the problem down into a fundamental component, then make the simplest possible example, and then get more and more complicated until you encounter the problem that you're dealing with to help isolate where it is. So I'm going to go ahead and create a figure and an axis. I just need a single panel, and I'm going to make my figure size 6 by 6. Next, we're going to create a hodograph object. I'm going to call it H. It takes the axis and the component range, which I know is going to be 120 for this particular sounding. This is a pretty high wind day. And to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on, I'm going to add a grid. It's always hard to tell without the range rings on this that it's really a polar plot. It looks very Cartesian otherwise and can be a little confusing, which it is Cartesian, right? We're plotting X and Y components, but on a polar grid makes more sense for this type of data to conceptualize it. And so now I'm going to go ahead and plot. I'm just going to call h.plot, sounding, and then we're going to plot the u-end using tab completion to save myself some typing here again, and v-wend. All right, so we got a plot. It's the default color cycler, Tableau Blue, and notice the axes are labeled knots because those U and V wind arrays have a unit attached, and that unit is knots. Matplotlib, we're just calling their plot command, and it's smart enough to go ahead and label those axes for us. Now, unfortunately, plot color mapped is something that's internal to MetPy, and the hooks between it and Matplotlib aren't quite there yet to make that unit behavior automatically pass through. So we're going to do this manually. Now, if you wanted to get the units out of any united array, let's say my u-end, all we need to do is look at what's called the attribute .units. You see, it says not. So what is that? Let's look at what the type of that is. So it is a pint unit, but it has a string representation. As we saw when we printed it out, it knows how to display itself as a string. So we can use that to automatically label our axes. So to avoid some extra typing, I'm going to go ahead and copy my example from here. And now we're going to change this from plot to plot color mapped. And plot color mapped, if you'll remember, colors the line by a third variable along its length. So in this case, I'm going to color it by the wind speed, which is just speed. So if we do that, we see we have this colored, so we've got high speeds up here. That makes sense. We're further away from the origin. But you'll notice our units have gone away. What we need to do is get a hold of that axes object and add them. So I'm going to access the axes through the hodograph object itself. So h.ax gets us to our axes. Then we're going to use the matplotlib functionality, set xlabel. And we need to set it to be the units, which we just saw how to do in the cell above this. So sounding u-end dot units. Then we're going to repeat that with our y label, and it's the v-wend. Now, I know that they're both the same, but maybe they're not for some reason. Maybe you're not carrying them to the same unit before plotting. That would be something very useful to know. And you would see that here. So now we have our not labels back, just like before. You can use this to set plot titles, to set things in legends. I've used it in a lot of places to make my plots automatically look a little bit nicer and be a little bit more informative and less likely to be wrong because I'm not hard coding that information. I'm just pulling it directly out of the data. I hope that you found this useful, and I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.